Hey guys, welcome to the Marcast. Reed here, off schedule here Tuesday night talking. Everything came down yesterday. We were had the Winter Classic for the Kraken and Golden Knights in town. Like right as I'm walking out the door, it's like I got up at 7 all day, and they're like Danny and the Rock are coming on, and they're coming on, and I'm sitting there waiting, and literally the second I'm walking out the door, they get an Uber. So I did my little shorts. Evan's here today. Andy was promised. I think Andy is still professoring. So Pat might hop on. We'll see. Always a good sign when we have lots of comments when I pull up the StreamYard before we get on. So we're going to talk through everything today, all the coaches and teams and cities. Evan's got lots of thoughts. I know. First off, Evan, how are you? And then I want to do just a little shout out to the Kraken. But how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Lots happened in the past couple days. Everything kind of came out at once. Sadly, I'm not the professor, but I'll do my best to replace him and his great words. But yeah, man, I'm doing well. Glad that things are finally official. Think it's going to be not only better for everybody who works on this stuff continuously, but everybody's mental health too, right? It's been a long couple months, so just glad that we've kind of got past that bit, and now the ball really gets rolling, as I put out on Twitter.
Yeah, and it's good that we're getting Jenna's checking in here, Zach. For everybody kind of involved in the kind of the player coaching staff, all of that, I'm very relieved because obviously we're kind of in the fan side a lot of it, and like my world is not revolving around this, right? So I'm very glad that the people that actually need to know and need to work on all of this stuff, that they can figure out what they need to do now, because I do think that there was a lot of like up in the air about all that. So good to see. Like I said, just shout out. I said on the stream that our New Year's Eve, I guess, day stream, kind of getting ready for the UFL. Say a prayer for the Kraken. Evan, we won 3-0 against the reigning Stanley Cup champions. Shout out Joey Decore. I mean, this was the greatest win in the history of the Kraken. Can you just be like, are you excited for me that I like literally the greatest win in the 3-year lifespan of the Kraken franchise, and I was there. So very excited.
That's good.
So shout out there. We're having a lot of debate here. So I guess let's get into the news first, and then we'll kind of get everyone's comments and all that stuff. Like I said, coming out yesterday, the first off here, Danny on the Rock on game day. Did you like that decision? Did you like the Pat McAfee's of it all? I went back and watched the segment later, but it didn't feel like they had a lot new to say. I mean, we got the cities and teams, but I was hoping we would get maybe a different branding messaging about all this stuff. It felt very status quo. What did you make?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the rollout was pretty good. The idea is to get it in front of a bigger and broader audience, right? So, tying in Fox and, sort of the NFL aspect. I mean, they're really trying to, again, just reach that target audience. I mean, that's more important than anything. Clearly, the growth of these leagues is what's or well, I guess one league now. I got to get used to saying that, but the growth of the new league is important, right? I mean, they had to take a bunch of teams out. People who know how this works know that there's a lot of inconsistency, a lot of shifting things around. So I think it's really important that they just try and make this more stable, and that's how it came across. It's yes, it's another new thing. Yes, the XFL only lasted 1 year, USFL only lasted 2, but this seems to be a bit more concrete now that they've taken the time to review finances and review the entire product as a whole. So yeah, ultimately I like the rollout. Having the first, official announcement there on whatever it was, the pregame show on Fox before the NFL Sunday slate, and then obviously the day after on New Year's Day, having the announcement there at College Game Day. I think that was good. Again, you're reaching that sort of target general football audience at both the professional level, being the NFL, and then the college level, being the college football playoff in the last year of its 4-team format. So all around, yeah, I mean, I think they did a good job.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I have the tweet up here, the press release, and congrats. First and foremost, I guess Mike Mitchell and Anthony both announcing today they're moving over to Sports Illustrated and all that, covering the UFL. And I still have to get used, like you were saying, the two leagues. I was like updating the website, and then I went back and realized I had typed USFL a bunch and all that stuff. I'm like, I still got to get used to this UFL. But Mike had put out the tweet a couple weeks ago. He was hearing 4-4, 5-3. Houston was kind of undecided. Mike gets a lot of grief. I think there's a lot of not justifiably, grief, but I think there's a lot of people like that want to like one up or be whatever. Like Mike was right. That's what I was hearing. We got all this stuff out. Interesting where you're talking about getting new, because to me, yes, like we're expanding the college game day fan base. We're doing all this stuff, but it's still the same message that the Rock's been saying for the last year. And it killed me when they have them on there. And here's your first chance. It's like, well, I was player 54. I'm like, I don't know if there's anybody in the world that hasn't heard that messaging yet. Now, obviously, The Rock came out on Raw last night, could be in a big feud here with Roman Reigns. So maybe we get some more promotion that way. But I would have thought maybe we tweak the philosophy a little bit here leading into all of that. But regardless, we got them out. As Mike had tweeted, we have the USFL and the XFL conference. We had the big debate. I didn't realize that was so controversial, right? But we do have that with the Stallions, Showboats, Panthers, and then the Roughnecks, which I don't know if I will ever fully be okay with that. And then the Renegades, Defenders, Brahmas, and Battlehawks. Evan, I know there was a back and forth. Are you happy with these two conferences? I was corresponding with former XFL employees, glad that they were moving on from the IP, not so quick, like because we had paid money for all this stuff. Were you surprised with the conferences, how this all rolled out?
A bit. I mean, again, that was the word that had been floated around prior. It does seem a bit silly in a way, but again, like to have some brand continuity, it's nice to see that at least the XFL name and the USFL name survived to some degree, because a separate debate was, well, what's the new name of the league going to be? Are you going to keep one or the other, or have some sort of mixture of the two? And I guess that's what they were trying to put together with the United Football League. But I will say, aside from the conferences themselves, because I want to get into, Houston and all that stuff specifically, but I think the one thing that was really interesting, well, maybe not interesting, but you already pointed out, when The Rock went up there on Fox and did his bit with Danny on the first day when they rolled out just the league as a whole before he got to markets or anything. And you were mentioning about, the typical player 54 speech that we've heard over and over again now. I mean, I think that is a sign that it really is. Yeah, the XFL shows a bit more here. And I know I sound biased. I was more lenient towards the XFL before, but I just really got a more, XFL vibe, at least from the branding and the way that it came off. There are obviously USFL elements there, and there's USFL people there. It's really nice to see that at least at the football operations level, they've brought together, I'd say, a very fair group from both sides that would work well together. But yeah, you can definitely tell that the XFL brand is more prevalent here, I think, than the USFL brand. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there as well. And again, that goes along with everything else that we've heard in terms of, again, just the way that the league is run. Like, this is still The Rock and Danny's project. And for a while, we weren't sure where they were going to be, with this, and maybe they were going to go do something else, but they're still here and, clearly still passionate about it, even if some of the stuff sounds repetitive to people who have followed this for a long time.
Yeah, good to get all this out. I want to know, Philip checking in here, a long time Roughnecks fan, excited for the inaugural game of the Houston Rufflers. Like, yeah, I want to know, like, if you're a Roughnecks fan, like, are you okay with this? And I know what you're saying, like, this feels, and we'll talk. We have Mike's info here about Jim Pop still being involved, and we got the info with, Daryl Johnston still being in there with Russ Brandon and all that stuff. Like, yes, in the up top, it does feel like, okay, we're kind of merging both of these philosophies, like Daryl Johnston, and we had the Russ Brandon interview today that we'll talk about, and that being involved kind of on the football ops, and we're still going to have Dean Blandino, and we're still going to have Mike Pereira. But yeah, I mean, you're insane if you're thinking that the Gamblers are a stronger franchise, no matter how historically significant they are, than the Roughnecks currently in the land that we're in. You can't have a 5-3 split. Which, I mean, it is right, but you can't have a 5 division versus 3. This isn't the CFL. So as kind of unappealing as I think this is, I don't know if they had a better option than the rebranding of that. Evan, I know you're someone very close with the Roughneck staff, and obviously a lot of them are going to be moving over to the Brahmas. Mike Mitchell reporting with Hines Ward and AJ Smith and all of that. And we can talk about why that's going to be at least my new team of the Markcast. But what are your thoughts on this? Because I know you've covered a controversial subject.
Yeah, well, again, this was the, I guess, hot topic for a while, was what's going to happen with Houston, right? Because they were the only team that had, sort of overlapping markets between the XFL and the USFL, and that made it a very unique situation. This wasn't the way that I thought they'd go about it, though. I think it's very interesting. I put it out there publicly. I said, I'm glad they kept the Roughnecks name. I thought that brand was way stronger, has that continuity that you want when you're, starting a new league for, how we've had so many leagues now. It's too hard to keep count, but you want to have some continuity in the Roughnecks. I think having been there in both 2020 in Vince's league and then 2023 in the Redbird Rock Danny league, again, just that continuity. So they kept that. But yeah, just very strange. I mean, the fact that the Roughnecks are in the USFL conference is all you really need to know, that this is a rebrand of the Gamblers. And I want to come on here and I want to make it very clear that while the Houston Roughnecks name has been kept, there's still been a lot of confusion about what the team actually is, because I had a lot of people texting me yesterday who watched the announcement and who obviously aren't as close to the situation as we are. They're like, well, congrats, man. Like, the Roughnecks survived. I knew that you were pretty nervous about that. You didn't think that was going to happen. And I said, well, they didn't quite survive, because technically the Roughnecks are now I guess, USFL team. I mean, as Philip said there in the chat, gamble necks, rufflers, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it really is just it's the Gamblers with new colors. That's the way I look at it. I still look at that team as the Houston Gamblers. It is no longer the Roughnecks. The staff have moved on. I believe a lot of the players will be moving on. So it's a very strange turn of events. I did not expect things to play out this way. I'll touch on the San Antonio stuff later, because that's a whole separate discussion that doesn't, I mean, it obviously has to do with the team because there's people involved there, right? But with the brand specifically, I was not expecting this. I think I said, out of all the scenarios that played out in my head as to how they could have handled this still wasn't one of the scenarios where they would just take the Roughnecks name and keep everybody from the Gamblers. Now, look, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Okay, I think Curtis Johnson is a good coach. They have a lot of good players on that team. But I mean, that the Roughnecks, it's going to be almost unrecognizable from last year compared to this year. They'll be playing at a different stadium at Rice. The staff's going to be completely different. You've got the roster turnover. So I don't know. Yeah, I agree with the idea that, while the team is still called the Roughnecks, it's really not the same. And, we all know that this is just the Gamblers with different jerseys and different logos and all that business. So kind of hard to accept. I understand why they did it that way. I don't disagree with the 4-4 split. Again, the terminology that was used at the beginning of this process was equal merger. So you do have to keep that in mind. I'm really glad, and I put this out publicly too already, I'm really glad that Houston still has a team that will play in Houston. I really think that market is important for this new league, even though they still have 3 Texas teams, being Houston, San Antonio, and then Arlington, which is obviously, the big one in all this, being the sort of I guess, headquarters, the center point for the entire league itself. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of thoughts around it. I'm still wrapping my head around this idea. There's a lot to get used to, not just with Houston, obviously, but with all the markets. And I'm just really interested to see where it goes. I think I'm going to go out there this season and just see how things have changed, whether it's for better or worse. We obviously can't say yet, because the UFL hasn't played a single snap of football, and there's a lot that's going to change, even if there is, some carryover from both sides. But yeah, very interesting, situation. Hard to say if I like it or not, as I've already pointed out, but it is what it is, and life goes on. And again, I'm really happy. I won't touch on this now. I'll pass it back to you, but I'm really glad that at least the Houston staff still gets, an opportunity to be in this league and to work somewhere else, because I know how important they were to this league's success. And having a guy like Wade Phillips, he's still, I'd say, the most outstanding coach of the bunch in this new league.
Yeah, we'll get to I'll scroll down. We'll get to the coaches in a second. And if you have questions, like I know Zach had a question about ticket deposits and stuff, I'll star them, put them in here, and then we'll get to it here in a little bit. Christina chiming in here. She's a new member. Thank you so much for coming up with the updates. I like the announcement. 2 parts of the NFL and college fans were told. Is there any news about when the schedule will be put out? We'll get more into that. Christina, thanks for being a member. Just a reminder, you can actually become a member now of the channel. It's like $1 a month. A good little way of support. I think we have like 8 members now. So that's YouTube was running an incentive to get people excited about that. But Russ Brandon saying middle of the month. That'll be good. I can't remember the timeline in which we got them. Certainly late last year with all the Vegas debacle and all of that. But yeah, with the Roughnecks thing, like I don't want to be like, yeah, fire all the gambler staff and move the Roughnecks. And like, I don't want anyone to lose their job. But I am just not a fan. And I put up Philip's comment like, well, everyone roots for the uniform. Like, that's why I have a hard time with like college football, just because of the turnover and like for these leagues, that have not been around for the decades and decades of these college programs. It is harder to kind of build that legacy with that. I will say for people, and I'm sure we have like CFL fans that are like, well, who cares if it's the Roughnecks or the Gambler? Like they've only been around. I mean, the Roughnecks were the premier brand of the 2020. PJ Walker was the standout of that. And then obviously that rolling into last year and then the success they had, and obviously not making it all the way to the championship game, but like they were still kind of the pinnacle of what that league stood for. In terms of the teams, just themselves, and I want to just make sure I comment on this. Interesting, the UFL kind of putting out this map now, like, logos mark the spots. Where are you going to be cheering from? We've talked about the Texas thing. We talked about this on the stream before, and people were okay with the 3 Texas teams because you had Seattle, because you had Vegas. Like when you're chopping out half the country here, kind of showing where your teams are, I think that says all you need to say about kind of the geographical, divide here. I think it's really hard cutting out the entire West Coast. I know there was no better way about it, and I don't care if it's Seattle or LA or Vegas or San Diego or something. I would have loved to see San Diego get in this. I know that's a lot of moving parts for the season, but Evan, do you get what I'm saying here? Like, here's the third of the country in which these teams reside.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that was the big thing with the USFL too, is it was very East Coast centric. The XFL made a point at least having, some West Coast expansion or, opportunities on the West Coast for people in the Pacific time zone. But those have obviously since gone away. I think part of that decision, comes because, if you're going to be based in Arlington and you're going to have the players there and you're flying them out for all these home games, it's a bit easier to, just focus on one part of the country. And that does put a lot of fans at a disadvantage. It's hard to grow the game in the league when you're, cutting off. I mean, literally, you look at that map. I mean, there's no West Coast representation whatsoever. But I think logistically, it's shorter flights. The players don't have to travel as much. And that's something you have to keep in consideration as well, because for a lot of guys, traveling to a home game is a new concept. And I remember, last year in the XFL when they had all the guys in Arlington, and that's the format that they're following now in the UFL, there were a lot of players that were upset about that. They said, well, what's the point of, playing at home if we still have to travel? And, I remember it was like whenever, guys had to go from Arlington to say, Vegas and DC or Seattle, like those were the ones that, people were saying, well, that's a pretty long flight, and Seattle in particular, I know you guys are kind of out of the way up there. But it's a couple different things. I mean, I think with Seattle specifically, distance plays a role. It's so far removed from all the other markets. With Vegas, I think it was just more of, the actual, logistics play a role there too, right? But I think the fact that they were already out of that stadium and they had the lowest attendance, that was, I hate to say it, but it was kind of an easy team, to just say, well, we don't need this anymore, because people were already saying during the XFL season last year, like, this isn't going to work out. Like, they need to get out of here as quickly as possible. So I don't know if anybody's too sad about that loss. I mean, it was a cool idea to have, another pro outdoor football team in Vegas. And obviously that's a market that means a lot to me now with me, working there to some capacity. But yeah, I mean, just a lot of things, Guardians obviously being gone. They're a team that, didn't really have the logistical problem in terms of geography. They were right down there in Florida. So, there's a lot of sacrifices that have been made here. I did take a minute to kind of, thank all the coaches and the players of the teams who didn't make it, right? Because everybody's going to be focused on, the teams that do last and that do exist. And we have that now, but it's pretty easy to forget, some of the teams that, um, that were, that didn't make it in the league. I mean, on the XFL side, Vegas and Orlando weren't particularly successful on the field, but like Seattle was a playoff team,
Yep.
last year. And again, that's pretty significant when you're cutting a team of that caliber. And I know June Jones and a couple of those guys were already out. They lost Danucci to the Broncos. Wasn't going to be the same way, or wasn't going to be the same team, rather, either way, if they came back in 2024. But again, tough decisions to be made, and on the USFL side as well. I won't touch on that too much for time's sake. And, I was closer to the XFL than I was the USFL, but they lost a lot too. I mean, if you think about it, the USFL almost lost more because while the Gamblers were retained, their brand was not. So in a way, it's almost 5 teams there that didn't make it. Really just the Showboats, the Stallions, and then the Panthers that survived. And, the Showboats, too, they were rebranded this season from the Bandits. So going back to 2022, it's just the Stallions and the Panthers that remain, which when you, kind of do the math and divide it down like that, that's pretty surreal that in 2 years, only 2 of 8 original brands are around.
Well, and I think that speaks to the importance of, even if it was the Arlington hub, which, like, I guess Russ Brandon reconfirmed today. Like, I thought we knew that already, but that was part of Mark had the write up on it. But we'll touch on that with the schedule and everything. But the flying out and all of that, I thought was confirmed, but like I was seeing that today, like this is confirmed and all of that. I think that did a lot for building some of these fan bases. Obviously, you had the carryover of DC and all of that. Exciting when we're talking about the loss of Orlando. Thrilled that Corey, their season ticket guy, is now going to be working in the Birmingham market. I think that that's awesome. I'm so glad that someone that kind of embodies what I think of like these leagues need is self-starters coming in and trying to kind of do what they can with the limited resources they have. I'm really excited to see Corey kind of get that opportunity. This was a question for Big Ugly Skeleton. I wonder if Seattle won the championship, but yeah, like if Seattle wins the championship, because this, like you said, there was a lot of logistical things with June Jones and everything. And, even besides the fact that it's Seattle and Lumen Field is expensive to run, like that would have been interesting. Do you rebrand the Seattle team or what do you do? Because obviously they did not want them as part of this, original 8 for this 2024 run.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're seeing certain teams that were more successful. I mean, I go back to the Roughnecks, right? Like, even though the Roughnecks technically didn't survive, the Gamblers were just rebranded to the Roughnecks, and it's still really a USFL team. They knew that Wade Phillips and his guys, like, they did good things last year. They were a playoff team, and they wanted to keep those guys around. So they held, I think, more weight in that process, once Hines Ward left. You're looking at the candidates. It's like, well, if we know that the Gamblers staff and players are just going to come in under the Roughnecks brand, why not just bring Wade in and it kind of completes the circle? I mean, there were people that were saying, why don't you just take the Gamblers staff and players and put them in San Antonio and just leave the Roughnecks alone if you're going to keep them? But again, it doesn't work like that because the Roughnecks are now, I mean, it's hard to explain. Like, it's not that they're now a USFL team, but they essentially said that, like, that team pretty much has a USFL background based on who's there and not an XFL background because all those guys are moving on. Again, really, really complicated to explain this stuff. I've had a lot of texts sent over the past, 48 hours. I'm like, no, it's not this. Like, you just got to bear with me. Like, these people went here and this is what we're doing now. And this is who I support. So it's been a lot, but again, to go back to that point specifically. I mean, I think if you have more success, it's fair that you have a better chance of maybe not necessarily sticking around, but again, like, your people will get an opportunity. And the same goes for the players, right? I don't think we've talked about that as much. We've been focused a lot on coaches and markets here, but with the players, right? Like, we've got a dispersal draft coming up at some point. And the best players, like, those guys will be back. They'll just be wearing different jerseys is the reality. Yes, there's still going to be jobs lost. There's still going to be guys who, won't play. There's a lot of opportunities that have already been lost, which is very sad. And we can't forget about that. That's been a very, I guess, one of the points that I've been very focused on here over the past couple months since we got the initial merger announcement, which was however long ago, back in September. But yeah, there's just going to be a lot of shifting around. And another coach that we haven't talked about is John DeFilippo, who I was having lunch with in Florida a couple weeks ago, is now taking over the Showboats. So pretty cool how that's panned out. Really happy for John. I mean, we had a chat, and obviously he didn't hint anything at that, but he did say, like, he was worried about it, right? And you don't know what your future is going to look like. And by that point, it was pretty clear, at least to me and probably to him as well, that the Breakers weren't making it. So I'm really glad that he gets another shot. I think they knew that with his NFL pedigree and his experience, he's also very young, that he could, come in and coach and be a face of a franchise here. The other guy, I want to talk about briefly, obviously there's a lot of coaches that have been.
Well, let's roll to the coach. We'll roll to the coaches here.
Yeah.
Let me get this cleaned up here, and then we'll roll down there. Shout out Act My Age here, becoming a new member. Appreciate that on here. I always like that. Yeah, let's get to the coaches, because we had the whole thing of the Mike coming out, the Heinz Ward, and all of that. We had was it Anthony Blevins, right, being brought in, going to be the Vegas guy. He seems to be left out here. You're going to have Skip Holtz with the Stallions, Curtis Johnson, like we talked about with the Roughnecks, John DeFilippo, which I think one of the Breakers guys had that news a couple weeks ago. I know we talked about that. And then Mike Nolan retaining with the Panthers, Stoops with the Renegades, Barlow back with the Defenders, and then Phillips, moving to the Brahmas, and then Anthony Becht on there with the Battlehawks. In terms of that, Hazlitt, I had heard, was upset being out, right? Obviously, we have the Heinz Ward where he didn't want to, Mike Mitchell reporting he didn't want to take the pay cut going into the next season, being off of his original deal. Are you any other surprises here? Any other thoughts?
I mean, what I was going to talk about in regards to the coaches, not the ones that have survived, I'll get to those in a minute, but the one guy that really just that I feel for is Anthony Blevins, and that's because he left his job in the NFL with the New York Giants to go coach the Vipers, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly, at least to me, that they weren't going to be around, because, again, you have to remember that they announced that the Vipers would not be returning to Cashman before the merger news came out. So that was, officially announced by the XFL really before they said anything about, cutting more teams and merging with the USFL, all that stuff. So I really feel for Blevins, because a lot of these other coaches, no disrespect to them, of course, but, they've bounced around a bit, right? Like when they're signed, they're probably not leaving a job that means that much to them, right? I mean, if you're leaving a job with an NFL team, and it doesn't really matter what the title is. I think Blevins was doing special teams, but leaving an NFL job for something like that, that's a big deal, because, again, we've seen, the instability of these leagues, and, guys get, shifted around and moved, like Wade's in San Antonio, John's over in Memphis. A lot of guys just aren't going to be coaching, right? So you're taking a big risk there. And unfortunately for Blevins, it hasn't panned out. And, in the back of my mind, I didn't think it was going to happen, but I was just kind of hoping for some miracle that maybe Blevins would get to take over one of these jobs, kind of like how Wade Phillips did in San Antonio, where Heinz Ward, the existing coach there, says, hey, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. I don't agree to terms. He steps out with his staff, and then, somebody like Blevins could come in. Obviously, I'm very happy for Wade. Maybe that's a good transition here to start talking about that. Really excited to see those guys over there. I think San Antonio is a great market. They had the championship game there. I think, again, it's strange to take Wade out of Houston when he had so many specific ties to that area, and I think that was a big draw for him. But I think it's going to be pretty cool to see, that staff move to San Antonio and still, mesh. And there will definitely be a couple players, making their way over there as well. As I pointed out, AJ Smith with his Mike Leach system, like there's guys there, Brandon Silvers and, guys like that, that fit really well in that system, right? It's a very specific structure. So specifically on offense, I would expect a lot of guys to, come over and make that transition. Like I've said, it's the Brahma necks now. We've got all these names, Gamble necks, Brahma necks, Rufflers. I don't know, but I'm cheering for San Antonio. I'll put it that way. I still care about Houston. That's the team where I have a lot of memories and that I really made my mark with. That was kind of my rise, I guess you could say, in some ways. But I care about the people here in this industry, Wade Phillips and again, that staff, those were the guys that I bonded with and that I meshed with. And it's no shade, no disrespect against the Gamblers and Curtis Johnson and his guys. I hope that they succeed and that we have a great game when we play them. But I really care about the people aspect here, and I enjoyed spending time with again Wade's staff when I was covering Houston, and hopefully we'll reconnect down there in San Antonio.
Over 100 people watching right now. Really appreciate that. Make sure you like and subscribe. You can become a member of the channel now. That's always exciting. Do that. Give a little dollar a month support. I will say, and it was interesting when all the Heinz Ward stuff came out this week with Mike Mitchell, like I said, reporting the whole contract issue, right? Where Wade Phillips were the Roughnecks, right, to go and all of that, and had the spot not opened up in San Antonio. You're paying Wade, to sit at home basically for another year, being on this contract. And I know, and we'll get to the season ticket holder aspect of it because I got an email from Seattle, and I know they've been pushing out some more comms today. People wanting to get updates on all that stuff, but you got to be careful with this merger. Like, we can't pay all these coaches to sit at home, and then we can't pay like this Blevins. Is he on? I'd be curious kind of what deal that was on here, where he did he get any sort of recompense here where he's not kind of to leave that job and do all of that? I think is interesting, but where they're refunding the season tickets, we're losing the Cashman Field money. We have all these kind of expenses we're trying to limit here. Makes sense kind of keeping some of those coaches that they can. And I know you talked about the people aspect of it, and I've seen a lot of comments well, like they should know, like they should be ready for this. Like they know how volatile this market is. Like, it's still people's jobs. I mean, it's still people's, I don't buy into that at all. Like, oh, well, you took time to invest in a startup. Like you should yeah, I mean, it might go out, but that doesn't mean that you're not that it's still not a travesty and a loss of, opportunity for all these people. So I always want to keep that in mind. Any of the other coaches, I know we're excited for Flip being there, and Mike Nolan with the Panthers did a good job. Stoops and all that makes sense. Are you surprised kind of any of the other, right? Hazlitt being out, and then we already had the Vegas thing, and then Orlando, Terrell Buckley, right? So I guess is he taking the paycheck sitting at home?
Well, I mean, I'm honestly just glad that, for a majority of the teams that stuck around, besides the shift in Houston, guys going to San Antonio, whatever, all that stuff we've already talked about. I'm just glad that they retained, the coaches that were there and that did a good job. I mean, Bob Stoops, Reggie Barlow's, Anthony Becks of the world. I'm glad that they didn't just blow the whole thing up and they were like, all right, guys, like we're keeping your team, but, we're just going to, start fresh and new coach, new GM, new players, all that. They didn't do that. They really kept those guys around, and rightfully so. They all did good things with their teams. And again, it's about that continuity. I think that's so important here. Like, there's been so much change, right? And there's been so many unexpected things, and honestly, a lot of losses here is the sad part. But if you at least keep some continuity for the people that do stick around and that are here for the long run, it's just going to be a lot easier on those people to follow the league. And again, the more things you change, people just start complaining. They're like, well, why do you have to do this? And like, we've already been through this. Just keep it the way it is. So yeah, I think ultimately that's where the coaches come in, and it's like, well, these are the guys that are going to lead the teams, obviously, and that's important.
In terms of any of the other stuff with that, I know we had obviously the announcement, which I'm very excited about, the Arlington Renegades taking on the Birmingham Stallions, kind of in the kickoff game. I know that there had been some debate because the Rangers are playing that day because March 30th is the kickoff. The Rangers are playing. That's across the street. I think Pat Ruffino was saying they're not playing until 6, so you could do the other. You could do noon or 2, whatever time you want to do afternoon game over at Choctaw. That's exciting because the mayor had tweeted out of Arlington that they're hosting the kickoff game because there was some debate if it was going to be in Birmingham or if it was going to be in Arlington. If it's in Arlington, I will definitely try to make it in. Birmingham is a much more challenging stretch to get to from Seattle. I can get a pretty easy direct flight to that. The other thing I guess I wanted to say before we move off the coaches, you're saying, talking about supporting the Brahmas. I had tweeted that out. We had a bunch of comments. Who's your team going to be now? I've said that. Definitely going to be the Brahmas. Wade Phillips followed me back on Twitter yesterday, so that always kind of helps incentivize that when you got the head coach on your staff. So Evan, are we in lockstep here? Riverwalk Tours and the Brahmas, is that going to be your team?
Riverwalk's on, baby. Let's do it.
Yeah. Jenny questioning. We have comments here. Yeah, they went from 16 teams to 8. Again, it's neither of these leagues wanted to get to this point. I think this is a merger by survival here. Chris talking about over 100 watching. Do you have any other comments on either the kickoff game or any of that kind of stuff? We can start moving to some other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really good that the Renegades and Stallions are playing each other in the opener. I almost thought that would get lost with all the other information that came out, that people wouldn't really be focused on the opener. But I mean, if you're going to have a USFL and XFL conference, it only makes sense to have the two champions from the previous season. And really, when you think about it, like, yes, there's been 2 USFL seasons and only 1 XFL season, but the USFL still hasn't had another champion other than the Stallions. They went back to back, and I really like their chances here in this new league. I'll throw that out there as well. That team, I really do believe, even if it's hard for me to admit, right, because I don't outright support them, but they've done a great job, and I think that they're still going to be a threat this year, even with a different landscape and other things going on. All the noise, it's a new league. That's one of the best. I think that is the single-handed best spring football team I've seen. It's up there with the 2020 Roughnecks. For me, it's like neck and neck. No pun intended. But I'm excited to see it, and the Renegades too. Like, if the game's in Arlington, I think that's going to be a fantastic atmosphere. And again, that's where all the teams are supposedly going to be based. I don't think that's confirmed yet. Just putting that out there too. I know there's been rumblings. I haven't seen that.
I think Russ basically confirmed that today.
But yeah,
I'm
mean,
pretty
it makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah.
If we're following the XFL format here, and as I pointed out at the top of the show, this whole operation is very XFL-esque, for lack of a better term. Then yeah, it would make sense to have the game in Arlington.
A couple of comments here, and then I want to get to some other. Yeah, so just to point out to everyone, if you're one of the season ticket holders, I got this email coming out. I thought that it was nice that they immediately addressed that. I mean, I got this yesterday, whatever. I mean, I tweeted this right when it came out. 10:50 a.m. I think the announcement was 2 hours prior. So I thought that was really nice, letting me know, season ticket money would be refunded to your payment purchase, because obviously with the XFL back in the bankruptcy, that was obviously chaotic back in 2020 with everything with COVID. But I saw a lot of comments like, that's the way you handle it. Like, if you're gonna, if you have to do this, make sure you get their people's money back, as quickly as possible, and obviously address all that. And then the XFL comms, just if you guys hadn't seen on like X or Twitter, whatever, if you need any more information about the UFL, they want you to go sign up. They have an email list here, the UFL.com. So I think that, when you're trying to merge these email databases and everything, if you're not getting league communications, I would kind of recommend those steps. But obviously they were tweeting that out. But make sure you get on that. Any takeaways from any of that stuff, Evan?
I mean, I'm glad that they're refunding the season tickets. I think that's just the right and ethical thing to do. You don't really question that. I'll be interested to see what the numbers for season tickets are like this year, with the remaining teams and really down to the conferences. Specifically Houston too, right? With the gamblers there, like, are people gonna, not want to be season ticket members with that much change? And same with San Antonio. Do their numbers go up because they're bringing in a staff that had more success in the XFL last season? I don't know, but we'll find out.
David here has a comment. Renegade Stallions opening match, it should be great. I agree. I think if you market this right, I think it can be really good. Obviously, to me, this feels like when like John Cena and Randy Orton like unified the WWE and World Heavyweight Championship belts. Like, it helps if you have a couple of years to kind of build up into this, but I still think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to be really cool for the kickoff. And we've gotten a lot of the 5 versus 3 or whatever with the teams. If the Stallions come out and whip the Renegades ass, like this could be, like, I think this is kind of there will be a lot on the line here in terms of bragging rights if you're worried about XFL and USFL. Any early thoughts on that, Evan? I mean, I know we still need to figure out what the Renegades and the Luis Perez's of the world and all of that, but Birmingham, that's a strong team to be coming in.
Well, I think it's going to be real chippy. I think you're still going to see a lot of, the XFL and USFL kind of fan clash, even though, it's really one league now. Again, the fact that they're going off the USFL and XFL conferences, that only should elevate the level of intensity, I'd say. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. On paper, we'll see where these teams are, like, through training camp. We still got to get through all that. There's very few things still finalized besides the coaches and the markets and things like that. So, we'll see. But, yeah, it'll be really interesting. What I'm really interested to see more than anything, not just with this opening game between Birmingham and Arlington, but everything as a whole is just, I wonder if, and we'll see what the rules are like here in the UFL, but I wonder if, these small differences or kinks maybe in play style between the USFL and XFL will have an effect on the players, when they play each other in a game, those out of conference games, right? When it's not XFL conference on XFL conference. I'm talking, when the Stallions play the Renegades, right? Are you going to see that difference based on, the way that they play? And there's not too many things that are different. At the end of the day, it's still football. It's not like the CFL where there's different field sizes. But that's something I was thinking about today just randomly. I was like, well, these players, depending on which league you've been in, especially the USFL, because some guys have played there, for 2 years, kind of get used to the flow of those games. And again, that some of the, slight rule changes and again, right down to venues. I mean, the USFL players, some of those guys haven't had the opportunity to play, in a home market. Like some of the players that they bring in these dispersal drafts will go to a team and they might be playing, their a pro football game in front of, however many people for the first time, so that there's that too. I mean, I know obviously that's probably a small number because, USFL teams traveled around more last season and, those players got to see a couple more different markets, but it wasn't like the XFL, where they had everybody in their home stadiums. And I mean, again, that's a really big deal. I'm so glad that they didn't, keep the traditional hub system, I guess you'd say. Like, yeah, they're still operating out of Arlington or whatever, but just getting everybody in their home markets, I think, is really, really key. And again, most of those, like the teams that survived, most of them were, again, on the USFL side, more importantly, XFL, those were already figured out. The only team that's really playing at home for the first time is, the Roughnecks, because it's essentially the Gamblers. But need I say more about that? So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, leave your here, A-Lane here, Happy New Year. Leave your game. What's your prediction for the opening game here? I already showed it on here, but we got Chop Got Sauce, 33-17 Science. I will say, I think the continuity of the 2 years with the USFL teams remained. I do think that is going to be key in that. Just pointing out here as well, I do have, if you didn't know, I have this in my closet. I have a USFL 2022 championship t-shirt. So if you have that on your bingo card, I'm wearing that today. Nation, so you're talking, would like to see them keep the USFL trophy. Probably going to have to rebrand that, but I'm on record. I think the USFL trophy was a substantial upgrade over the XFL one, even if you can't, you could drink out of the XFL one upside down. I had a funny comment from Tim here. You could just put your season Sea Dragons money towards the BC Lions multi-game flex pass. Tim, you underestimate the distance and time it takes to get from here to BC, even though it feels very close to get to downtown Vancouver. And then Jacob was already asking about the kickoffs. They had the Russ Brandon was on like 101.7 ESPN today. Mark here, I can show. Mark had this whole write-up about it on Hub. But basically with Blandino and Pereira both going to be involved. And I want to talk about Jim Pop and all that before we get out. Like, it feels like it's going to be a mix of the two. If you're going to have both of the rules guys in there, that's kind of what I presume. And if we're doing this, merger of equals, besides the kickoff, I mean, is there anything that you're dying on to keep one or the other?
I mean, I don't know. For me, that's just see, some people get really, uptight about that. They're like, well, we need this one and this one's wrong. I'm just like, look, both of them present, interesting scenarios. And I hope that, these differences continue to develop, right? That the game can still be unique, that players are safer. Um, so I don't really mind which one it is. I mean, if we're going to be arguing over rule changes, I think that still shows that we have a lot of tension between these again, these two different sides, right? Like, we're supposed to be, one league, it's United UFL, but that pre-existing, USFL and XFL. I mean, we went through all that stuff this year when the teams overlapped, or the leagues rather overlapped for the first time, and what will be the last time. So yeah, it's fun to follow along with that stuff and people's opinions. But me personally, I'm like, whatever, as long as the rules are fair and they make the game interesting, and again, they're carried out properly, right? We have all these debates about officiating in the NFL that never seem to end. So as long as everything's handled in a respectful and fair manner, then yeah, we should be fine.
The Yes, and especially considering that many of the USFL rules were carried over from the XFL back in 2020, and we had, if you are curious about any of that, with Sam Schwartzstein, he's been on the podcast, and you can talk through all of his stuff. He's with Amazon now, but interesting, kind of like. That to me was fascinating. I think Sam was on twice talking about the work that went into figuring out those rules, and then he was kind of why did the USFL choose some and not the other? YG prefers the USFL extra point. I prefer making them go for it because you're incentivizing with kicking that. The kickoff to me is always like we're just moving the ball back to get rid of the touchback and all of that. Never too exciting. Jenny here, USFL and XFL championships. This is what I said on the stream the other day. Give those titles to the we already, those like the North and South XFL ones were not very exciting trophies. Give them the XFL, give them the USFL, and then you go in. I mean, I said it before on the thing. I like the conferences. I think all that works. So to me, that builds. You're always going to have this animosity. So I think you might as well play into that with the two conferences on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more interesting than East and West. I mean, I never thought that we'd be talking so much about conferences, because really in many sports they don't matter. It's, just East, West, North, South, you get it over with. It's all geographical. But here they're at least keeping that lineage, and I'm really glad to see that, because I was a bit concerned that they would just try and eliminate any trace of, USFL and XFL branding, because we're all supposed to be one now, right? It's, the United Football League, UFL. But they still kept some of that around, and that's good, right? Because to me, at least, this is all recent history. Like, yeah, USFL was in the 80s, XFL was in 2001, but I feel like a lot of the stuff, that's been developing and changing just has been over the past 2 years, because we haven't had this much consistent spring pro football ever, right? Like, we're going on 2024 now, having at a minimum 8 teams playing, to some degree in some place. And last year, in 2023, it was 16, because you had 2 leagues competing against each other for the first time. And I'll say now, just while I'm thinking about it, that really is an incredible accomplishment. And, it's probably not one that we're going to see again, but the fact that we had 16 alternative pro football teams playing at one point, at the same time, overlapping here in the United States, 16 teams. You think about how many opportunities that is for players. The fact that we even had that at all is a phenomenal accomplishment. That's half of what the NFL has. Of course, we're back down to 8 now, so that's a bit sombering. But again, the whole idea here is that you're continuing, I guess, not just the legacy, but you're making sure that things are more stable so that this can last for longer. And that's what's been proposed by a lot of people, that I'm close to in this industry, people that work in the league. It's all about just making sure that this does exist, because it was pretty clear, when these leagues announced the intent to merge, again, not the actual merger itself, but the intent, which is a different thing. But, people get confused by that too. The first thought that I had then was like, well, clearly, they financially or whatever, like, there just wasn't enough, to have another year of those 16 teams overlapping. And I think the most important thing for me, like, yes, obviously finances are important here. We all know that plays a critical role in the football space at any level. But I think the level of interest, right? I think, there's probably, and it's tough for me to admit this as somebody who's very passionate about this, but there's probably just not enough interest to have 16 fan bases. And again, we didn't even get to I said that the 16 teams was a phenomenal accomplishment, and it was, but we still didn't get 16 markets. We had
Yeah,
what,
yeah,
12? Because 4,
yeah.
not in the
Well,
USFL.
yeah,
I
11
don't
and
know.
a half,
I
11
can't.
and
I
a
guess
half.
because Canton, they had the 2. I'm
Yeah,
not going
yeah,
to do that
yeah,
math,
yeah.
but
I get it.
we
I get
didn't
it. Yeah,
get the 16 full markets, is what I'm getting at here. So that, that's a bit tough, and that's maybe the one thing where it's like you could argue that had they gotten that done earlier, and that was my biggest gripe about the USFL, was you need to get in those home markets, even if this thing doesn't last, to at least, again, establish yourself in a more concrete area. Maybe if you had that, some of this is different, but I don't know. That's getting into these hypotheticals, and we've had far too many of those in regards to these merger talks. So I'll just say, it's been really, really fun watching this, and it's tough sometimes, right? And it's frustrating, and we're used to change now, though. I guess is what I'm ultimately getting at. So even if there is that frustration and that anger and that confusion, um, here we are in 2024. We still have an pro league here in the United States that we can, root for and buy into and support. And even if things for me change, my support for whatever's going on there is not going to change.
Yeah, so let's get here. I have we have still about 100 people watching here. So like I said, make sure you're subscribed on here, lots of stuff. And we'll get back to all the pre-recorded. I know we've done a lot of these lives lately, and there's always mixed opinions about all that. But right now, to me, this just works the best to kind of like, come on, we can do the kind of debate and all this stuff. You kind of get the comments, all that. But make sure you're subscribed, become a channel member if you want for all that. My last news, and then we'll probably get out of here at the hour. I know Evan's good till 7. We'll get to comments here. The last news I wanted to talk about, Mike putting out Jim Pop still going to be involved. People are asking Mike today questions. Kind of, he was going through all the Sports Illustrated stuff, but you're going to have Jim in there alongside Daryl Johnson. Whaley's still involved. Russ Giulio, who's been on the show as well. Doug West and Dave Dykeman. Really good interview with Russ Giulio. We did back like it was after the season. It was like pre-showcases if you're kind of curious about all the league building of all that stuff. But to me, this is really like the Avengers of like, we're really, if Fox hadn't tried to get ahead of the XFL and do this, and then we went back and forth and we flew too close to the sun, and now we got to merge. Like, this is the greatest kind of heads and conglomeration of spring football that we've had in some time. And they all have past experience with that. Evan, just talk about it. And obviously Jim and his past experience with the CFL as well. But like, this is a monumental group of people that are going to be involved in this.
Well, absolutely. And this is one of the, excuse me, this is one of the major benefits about sort of combining these two leagues, is you're not only combining, teams and markets and whatever. And again, yeah, you're getting rid of some, but if we're just looking at the positives here, you're bringing together these great football minds, because it took a lot of time and patience and just thought, really, to put together both the USFL and XFL, because what people tend to forget is, even though these leagues have come together, they were, somewhat different ventures in terms of the way that they were operated. But regardless, like, I've had respect on both sides for all of the football ops people. And now that those guys get to come together, honestly, this might be the greatest benefit, I think, of the merged league, because I've been saying a lot of, I don't want to say that I've been negative about the whole thing, but I've certainly, spoke my mind about it, and it's been something that I think about frequently. But this right here, when you're talking about these executives, guys with, however much experience that they've had, in different leagues, different countries, different teams, different eras of the game, even, when you're bringing those guys together, this is what should make the product more concrete. When you bring in, again, these top executives, the people with the most experience, that's what you're kind of gambling on. No pun intended there either. It's kind of what you're gambling on, to make this, again, just a longer lasting thing, because there's so many people that doubt that even that this merged league, the UFL, will last. But I still have hope, even though that we've been through all these changes, again, because of the people who are there and who are leading the way. So yeah, I think Jim Pop and, just combining the rest of those guys, Daryl Johnston, it's all fantastic.
Yeah, and to me, like, and honestly, a lot of it, in my opinion, was brought on by the USFL. Like, I never really liked this, like, measuring contest and real football and running all these. Like, I think let's get, the Hollywood leagues and all that. Let's get all that silliness out of the way here, and let's realize like there's a lot of money and time and energy involved in this, and players putting their lives on hold, and coaches, and kind of all of that stuff. So I think let's come together on here. Very very impressive kind of list of all of that stuff. So certainly exciting. I'll go through just any other questions we have on here, and then Evan, if you have anything else, I don't want to hold you up too much. Gregor asking, going to be at the Arlington game. That's the plan. We'll see. I mean, I'm free that weekend, so that like I said, that's certainly easier than getting to Birmingham. Chris talking about we get the Rock back involved here with he and Danny did the opening games and all of that back in last season, so that will be exciting. And then Evan, we know the Roughnecks. That's going to be at Rice, right? What's right? Is that basically confirmed, or how are we operating with that with the Roughnecks venue?
Yeah, I honestly don't know if that's confirmed or not, but that's what I have been told multiple times. It was floated around. It seems like the most obvious option. And it's a very similar venue to, where they were playing at TDECU. It's a group of 5 college football stadium. And size-wise, that's very good, for the market and for, the audience that you're trying to bring in. The whole reason that the Roughnecks, can't play at TDECU this year is because they're renovating that stadium as Houston again makes that transition to the Power 5 level. They need to make some upgrades, get it up to standard. So yeah, I think Rice is a good fit. I mean, whether it's confirmed or not, again, don't quote me on that, but it sure sounds like that's where it's going to be. So I not that I gamble, again, no pun intended, not that I gamble anything in the sports world, but I'd maybe put money on them playing at Rice.
I guess lead the way in the outreach. Mid-June championship game is going to be whatever 10 weeks plus a playoff going in. So whatever, do the math on that. Is that mid-June if they kick it off March 30th? So do the math on that. Like I said, before we get out, Mike said, I guess tentatively the supplemental draft is going to be on Friday. I could see us trying to do something with that. I don't know if they're going to put out anything ahead of time. I think it's generally going to be that we get a press release at some point in the day with the players that have been assigned. Like I said, be subscribed on here, follow on Twitter. I'll post about that kind of stuff. But, Mike says here June 15th, but we like to do that. So if Evan and whoever wants to get involved, maybe I'll hit up John Vogel, who's probably licking his wounds a little bit after his tweet talking about the 4-4 market.
Busy time for Vogel, man. I mean, we're coming up on all the All-Star games and the draft.
Maybe that would be
a lot of player stuff.
Well, maybe that wouldn't be. We'll see. I'm always like, oh yes, there's real things going on here. These people are working through, so we'll get through all that. If anyone else has any questions before we get out, but I think we did a good job. I think we talked to Pops and everything. Jim Pop. I wanted to make sure we talked about the Russ brand and all of that. Any other comments from you, Evan? We'll put this to bed here at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I'll just finish this off talking about the draft quickly. And I was going to put a tweet up about it, but, I may as well just say it here. I've had some players reach out, and these are free agent players, not guys that have been in the league before. Some of them, that were in NFL camps this past year asking me about this UFL draft. It should be pretty clear that this draft, whenever it happens, I don't think, we've been through so many dates, and I'm not really worried about that. Like, I'll see it when it happens.
Yeah.
But with this draft, I just want to put it out there, make it clear, like it's a dispersal draft. So unless you are under contract with one of these teams on either the USFL or the XFL side that did not survive the merger, then like that's who the draft is for. It's not just a typical, one of these drafts that we've had, like the XFL's had several different drafts. They had the big one November of 2022, the first one, and then the supplemental, and then they had all the rookie drafts over the summer, which weren't announced, like Reed, you pointed out. Probably just get a press release, and it's like, well, these guys are with these teams now, and I'm sure even the term draft, like, it might not really be a typical draft. It might just be I don't know how they're going to structure that. That's kind of above my pay grade, but they have some different approaches when it comes to this stuff, and this is not really something that's been done before. So we'll be interested to see where guys end up. I'm sure I'll be back on here talking about that and talking with other people as I normally do about this stuff because I love it. But just wanted to point that out, put that out there, before we get out.
Yeah, Philip asking, how do you become a channel member? You hit the join button there. That's fun. It's cool. I tracks and makes me feel that makes me feel warm to get that. I will say, whatever you want, this dispersal draft, whatever you want these supplemental drafts, whatever you are envisioning, it will be the least sexy version of any of that kind of stuff. And they'll send it out, and then we'll come on. But it was fun. We've done that before, and we get Coach Craig Sports on if he's if whoever's busy. We'll get together a conglomeration. But stay tuned for all of that. Like I said, I appreciate Evan coming on here and everyone else for taking part. We'll see y'all. But yeah, if something's going to be on Friday, stay tuned for that, and we'll do all that stuff. But otherwise, thanks, Evan, and we'll see you next time.